So let's get into the section about setting up your merchant services account. Perhaps the first question is, why even bother with a merchant account? So let's get into the advantages of having a merchant account. First of all, they're more convenient, and it's a cost-effective way of collecting payments from your customers, in particular your advertising customers. You know, there's always more credit available than there is cash. So this gives the customer another payment option to purchase from you. It makes it easier to buy, as it's another form of financing. And the more options that your customers have, the better. And especially when you have reoccurring payments, such as monthly advertising payment, this is a more convenient and easier way to collect those funds. Now, I'm not going to try to make you an expert on merchant services, but I thought it would be good to give you an overview of merchant services accounts. I can tell you that unless you have had a lot of experience on your own, although it might seem simple on the surface, it is actually quite complicated and more of a situation where they don't need you, you need them. There's basically two types of merchant accounts. There's the point of sale, where the customer is physically present at the time and the card is in their possession. And then there's the option where the cardholder is not present and the card is not present at the point of transaction. You will find that there is no shortage of merchant service account providers out there. It's not unusual for a business to get a call a day in an attempt to get them to switch their merchant services account. There are basically two types of providers. There's the processors and then the independent sales organizations. The processing industry is highly concentrated, with the top 5 handling about 70% of the transactions. Now, normally you would think as a merchant, which is you, that you would like to cut out the middleman and work directly with the processor. However, most processors outsource everything through an ISO, where 80% of the business is done. Effectively, the independent sales organization is a reseller of the service. And there are basically two types of ISOs. There's the banks and the non-banks. For example, Wells Fargo is an ISO of First Data. Most of you are familiar with the main brands, such as Visa, MasterCard, American Express, Discover, and JBC, and JCB International. There's a lot of compliance that takes place in the payment card industry, and it's designed to protect the processor as well as the merchant and the customers. If for some reason a business were to become non-compliant, they can be fined, certainly held financially responsible themselves, and can even lose their merchant account. And once they lose their merchant account, it becomes more difficult for them to obtain a merchant account from anybody else. So my point being is that you need to be very careful in this area and treat your merchant account as a very valuable commodity. Generally, the fees charged come in 3 versions. There's the per transaction fee, which either is going to be a percentage or a set fee. And typically when the card is swiped, that's the least expensive transaction, as the cardholder is present. There's chargebacks, where the merchant, which is you, bears the risk of any non-payment. And there's typically a fee for these chargebacks due to the processing. And many merchant service accounts have minimums. So you could end up paying for service even if you don't have any transactions. There are a number of variables that go into determining the merchant risk. For example, how long's the merchant been around? What's their financial stability? What's the business owner's credit worthiness? What industry are they in? What's the type of product or service that they're offering? And what's their previous processing history? There are a number of variables that go into the determination of the merchant's risk. For example, on the lowest risk side are restaurants and retailers. Merchants offering health and beauty products as well as tuition and utility payments typically are seen as medium risk. Higher risk items would come in on software, advertising services such as ours, insurance, and jewelry. Merchants that are often difficult to underwrite would be ticket brokers and nutrition products offering miracle results. And there are always a number of prohibited merchants such as collection agencies, credit repair, multi-year memberships, etc. So all merchant service accounts require personal guarantee, unless of course you're a public company. It's your obligation to pay back the issuer of the card for any dispute that may arise where you've been ruled against. Although we don't anticipate this to happen a lot, it has more to do with the expectations that you give the business owner. So if a dispute arises, you will need to provide that information to handle the dispute. So in most cases we can help you, and ideally you will prevail. But we would suggest avoiding the issue altogether, and this has a lot to do with setting those expectations up front. Suggestions on lowering your risk as a merchant service would be to bill monthly instead of quarterly or annually, and have some money in your bank. Where you set up your account is your option. You can set up your merchant account with the provider that we use that handles most of our franchises, or you may use another provider if you wish. But I would suggest, unless you have a lot of experience in that area, that you consider using our provider. We will forward you the paperwork. Most of that paperwork is filled out online. But typically you will also need to provide a copy of your driver's license, articles of organization for your entity, a voided check, sometimes they want a copy of the franchise agreement, and a utility bill just to confirm ID. An application for a merchant account will typically look like this. It's really not much different than paperwork that you would fill out to apply for a loan. You have your name and your business information up front, tax ID information, as well as much more. Our provider has their transactions running through Deutsche Bank, but it's really up to you what you want to do. I will close this section out on the module, leaving you with just one additional note that this is an important section